Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. Hope you are having a wonderful day. And joining me today is my co-host, Micah Current. Micah, what's the word, man?
Jeans.
Jeans. Yeah,
I put jeans on
jeans
today
right.
for the first time since like April.
Yeah, I'm wearing jeans right now.
I went out this morning and I started the car for my wife and got the defrost on, and I told you I was going to run an errand before we started recording, and I was like, you know what? It's 45 degrees outside. I'm going to put a pair of jeans on because I haven't worn
Yeah.
jeans in April, but it's cold enough to do so.
Well, last night I ended up putting on the heated blanket on the bed and got that all plugged in and heated. And then I told my wife, hey, we need to clean out the garage because Peter had his birthday party and we had a bunch of like inflatable water slides.
Yeah.
So now all that's sitting in the garage, just kind of like waiting to get packed up and put away. And I'm like, you know, we need to do that so we can get the garage cleaned off. Because if not, then you're going to be scraping your windshield every time you have to go to work instead of just having it right there. So yeah, it's starting to get cold, and
Are
even
you
my
guys one of those people? Or are you guys one of those folks that or families, whatever you want to call it, that waits forever to turn the heater on?
usually I do, but Laura must have turned it on yesterday because I remember I got up to get ready for church, and I'm like, oh, the heater's on. So she must have turned it on in the middle of the night because I was fine. We didn't even have the heated blanket on that time. So
We've been
yeah,
trying, like, we try to make it to November every year. And we're
yeah,
about halfway through October, so I don't know if we're going to make it or not, because last week we had a day where it was like in the mid 80s, and then like by Friday or Saturday it was down in the 40s and 50s.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
who knows, right? But like we have a little space heater in our bedroom that we just turn on, and it warms our whole room. So like we don't really have to worry about cranking the heater. It's really weird. Our house is like, we have a 3 bedroom, 3 bathroom house. It's 2 stories. Our bedroom, the master bedroom, is the biggest room in the house because it sits above the garage. And so in the winter, it gets super hot because of the heater, right? And then in the summer, it gets super hot because the air conditioner doesn't go there as well because it's the biggest room in the house. So we had to put a window unit in the window in our master bedroom. So like it's crazy how we try to wait, because when we kick the heat on, it gets kind of warm in our room. So we try to wait. We try to wait it out. So
Yeah.
and then last year when we had that real bad winter storm come through, like right around Christmas, when we had that, our toilets like froze for like 3 days. That was nuts. We have one working toilet in our entire house,
Mm,
um, which is crazy. But first world problems, right?
that's right. That is right. Yeah. So before we dive into our topic today, stories gone wild. Do you have something?
Do I have something? Well, I didn't know we were going to record until I texted you last night.
Yeah,
Um, I really need to just start writing some of these stories down, like, because yes, don't you have a list of like
I
some of the?
do. Actually, I'm pulling it up right now just to see if I have, because there's so many. There's so many good ones. Yeah,
Um, I don't know. Like you said, there's just so many that I could pick from. I have a good one. I have a really good one. So, um, are you looking? You want me to go first? Are you still looking?
yeah.
Okay. So, um, I don't know if I told you this before, Scott, but a couple of years ago, I was working at a church, and I was bivocational. Obviously, I worked at the university full time. This is before the pandemic, and then I worked at the church super part time, like stipend level part time, right? And so we went there on a Saturday because Alicia and I were trying to do some stage design stuff. We were doing some stuff with the lights. It was a beautiful day outside. I think the youth group had a trip somewhere, and the way the church was set up, there were some side doors, and so one of the youth kids left the door open when they were going to go on this trip. And so Alicia and I are in the sanctuary working on the lights, getting stuff ready for Sunday, and a bird gets in the sanctuary. A bird. And I'm gonna try my best to describe this the best I can. But the way the sanctuary for us was in a gym, and then the way the building was built, so like we had the sanctuary, which was the gym, and then behind it was the baptism, right? And so behind the baptism was kind of maintenance utility area, and then behind that was the children's ministry center. So we're like, crap, a bird flew in here. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to get this thing out of here, right? So like we were like, it'll fly out. And we just left the doors open. Sure enough, an hour goes by, the thing is still just spazzing out, flying around. It goes up underneath where the baptism is, right? And then it goes into where the maintenance thing is, and it's an open, it's basically to the roof, right? And so we couldn't get this bird. And so I call one of the elders and like, hey, his name's Gus, and he's like, there's not much you can do other than I hope it just flies out. Right. And so, but I called the pastor, and the pastor's like losing it. Right. He's like, what? Did you get the bird? Did you get the bird? And meanwhile, this is like a tissue of lies that happens in this whole this whole story. And that's not a tissue of lies. It's more of a like it's better left unsaid kind of thing. And so like Alicia and I have a friend.
I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the Nerd Eagle of the Apocalypse.
Sorry.
Alicia, that's good. Alicia and I have a friend who was the children's pastor on staff with me there. And she went with the youth, or she was at the church, and she was like, hey, we should go to Crossroads, because Crossroads at the time offered a Saturday night service. And we were like, oh, cool, let's go, because we can just go to church and go grab dinner. And the pastor was so worried about the bird, he kept calling us and was like, did you get the bird out? Did you get the bird out? Did you get the bird out? And I was like, I didn't want to tell him that we were at Crossroads, because he didn't like Crossroads, because he wasn't a big fan of mega churches. And so we go to church at Crossroads, and then our friend Liz and Alicia and I went to dinner. And on our way to dinner, pastor calls us, and I'm like, crap, I've got to answer his call, because he called me like 3 times while we were in church at Crossroads. And so I call him back, and I'm like, hey, he's like, did you get the bird? I was like, no, we left. He's like, well, where did you go? I was like, we went to see a movie. Because we didn't want him to know we went to Crossroads, because he was so mad about, like, he didn't like mega churches. And so he's like, well, what movie did you go see? And I was like, I can't remember the name. And I kept just like trying, he kept asking me all these questions, right? And so finally, we get home, and we were going to go see a movie. I don't remember the movie, but we watched the trailer for the movie. And so the next morning when we get to church, we think the bird got out. But then pastor comes up and he's like, so do you remember the name of the movie? And I was like, yeah, it was that basketball movie with Ben Affleck in it. And again, I don't remember the title now. This was years ago. But like, yeah, it was a crazy, 2 crazy things going on at the same time, right? The bird, and the fact that we went to another church, and he was just so like, I don't know, afraid that we're going to go to a mega church. I don't know why he didn't like mega churches, but I think it was because Crossroads is one of the larger churches in North America, and it's one of the biggest churches in the area where we live. And I don't know if that can be a podcast topic, right? Like mega churches and how pastors feel about mega churches. And well, like, just like, people want to go to church, right? And so like, if they can go to church and they can just feel a part and go and feel like they've been at church, some mega churches are, it for people, right? But they're not for everybody. So yeah, that was just it was a conglomerate of stories. That bird. So did you find a story?
Yeah. So it's been very interesting, because occasionally I always run into like these random YouTube prophets. Do you know what a YouTube prophet is?
I think I've heard the phrase, but kind of refresh me on it.
So YouTube prophets are usually these people who feel like that they have a prophetic voice, or they're modern day, or they claim to be modern day prophets. And they make these like bold claims about situations or things happening in the world. So for an example, there's probably going to be a lot of YouTube prophets talking about the whole Israel attacks that's been happening. The Palestine-Israel attacks that's been happening over the weekend. So that's something, right? But there's one guy in particular who years ago I used to watch it. I was just curious, does this guy still exist? And he does, he still exists. I don't know his name, but he goes by the third eagle of the apocalypse. You ever hear about this guy? So this is the guy who, one of his big things is he'll take like certain things or big events and he will say like, hey, because of this event or how this event played out, this is what it means. So, and specifically Super Bowl, like he believes that God is trying to tell people about what's happening in the world or the returning of Jesus Christ based on how things happen in the Super Bowl. If someone gets injured, that's a sign for something. But then one of the funniest ones that he
do you mean like end of times kind of stuff?
Yeah, end of times, end of times. But there's this one time where he was breaking down the lyrics to Carly Rae Jepsen's Call Me Maybe. And he starts going like, let's break this down. Hey, I just met you. And then he starts breaking that down, which is something weird. And then he goes, and this is crazy. Well, it's crazy that the devil is talking to you, isn't it? And then he goes, so here's my number, meaning the number of the beast. So Call Me Maybe goes, and see, it's not Call Me Maybe, but maybe is the name of the Antichrist. So there's somebody who has a last name or first name named Maybe. Beware of that person because they may be the Antichrist. We're just going to propel the end of the world.
So I know it's not what we're talking about today, but obviously Israel is under attack as we speak.
Yeah.
Palestine has bombed them, and their headline that I saw this morning said 800 murdered or 800 presumed dead, at least 800.
Yeah.
It's funny you say the whole prophetic thing like that, but like, I remember growing up, like my grandparents, and my grandmother is one of 4 siblings, and so her oldest sister, and her husband they were pastors for years, and then her other brother was a pastor, and so like the 4 of them and their spouses are very close, right? So like we always joke, my brother Lonnie and I always joke and call them the elders, and like because it's always like all doom and gloom, and anytime something happens in the Middle East, Jesus is coming back, and similar to what you're saying with this prophetic word, which I don't know, like the word of God says no man knows the hour.
But right. Here's the crazy thing about that. There was a poll recently taken back in 2001 and then in 2003, because again, it started to kind of ramp up right when COVID hit, like more people are coming out of the woodwork. There are 38% of Americans believe that God reveals his plans to human prophets, modern day human prophets. 38% of people, whether I'm not specific if they're church going people, if they're Christians, or just people in general, but 38% believe that is true. Like if someone says, hey, I believe Jesus is going to come back on December 1st, 2023, then guess what? 23% of the population is going to believe me when I say that, if I claim to be a prophet. Which is insane. That's a very high number. That's a very high percentage.
Yes. And there's all these books, and there's all these, like you're saying, these YouTube people, and, it's not uncommon. Like as soon as we probably get off of this call, Scott, like I'll probably go on TikTok and we'll see all these things on, prophets, and like, I think something recently that I saw was there was this, like, I don't know if it's like October the 20th or October 22nd or something. People are saying that like, that's going to happen. The rapture's happening. And, I'm very much a believer that, you need to be right with the Lord. Jesus is coming. We don't know when. Right. And so, the Bible also talks about false prophets. Right. And so you got to be careful. That's all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, prayers for Israel for sure.
Yeah.
Our world is definitely, under attack, or there's differences, whether it's political, whether it's racial, whether it's countries, whether it's whatever. And
Yeah.
This world, definitely needs Jesus. And, it's just heartbreaking to see what's going on in Israel. And it's heartbreaking to see what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. It's heartbreaking to see what's going on in our country and all over the world for that matter. And so I think we need Jesus now more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jeez. So today we're actually going to be talking about a topic that has nothing to do with anything we've talked about thus far. We're actually going to be talking about what are successful community outreach strategies. Now, if you are a church, a lot of times, one of the biggest things I always hear, at least anytime when I have always campaigned for a church job, especially within the Church of God, one of the questions I always hear is, how are you going to reach out to the people within the community? Which I always find that question very fascinating, because it almost sounds like, what are you single-handedly going to do to get people to come to this church? As far as what are we going to do? It's the verbiage, I think, is kind of the thing. So I find this question fascinating because for my doctorate project, I have to do a historical research about my topic. So I was actually looking at William Booth, the creator of the Salvation Army, and how that whole thing came to be. And it was very fascinating because he ended up he was a Wesleyan Methodist minister, and then he wanted to do outreach into the community and be with like the poor and help them out. One time there's a story where apparently he was just a lay leader, and he brought a bunch of homeless people into the church and had them kind of right up front where the pastor was, and the church staff was not too happy with him about that and told them that they needed to sit in the back. So they did, and then basically reprimanded him, saying that anytime you bring people off the street, they need to sit in the back, they can't sit up in the front. Which he's like, okay, that's weird, because Methodists were very big into helping the poor and the outcast, and there's definitely a shift. So eventually he left that branch of Methodism, went to a different branch of Methodism, left that one, and then went to a different branch of three branches of Methodism before he finally said, okay. And the last branch of Methodism, the final straw for him was he needed to have a circuit. Basically, he needed to be a pastor of a church, and he didn't want to be a pastor of a church. He actually wanted to talk to people and minister to people on the street. So that was the final straw. So he became an independent minister, and he created the Salvation Army soon after, him and his wife did. And that's how it began. So outreach has always been a certain important thing with the church. And yet I feel like anytime when people try to do outreach or they talk about outreach, I feel like a lot of times they have like a certain idea of what they want to do, but then sometimes their execution or what comes from it may be different than what they initially thought. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about kind of what are some effective ways, or how do we gauge effectiveness in our outreach programs in the church?
A loaded question.
It is. And I think it's loaded because it depends on what the vision is, right? I think, for the Salvation Army, their big thing was, okay, let's lead people to Christ. So there's an evangelistic component. Let's minister to the outcast in society, or the poor, which not only was that important, but then right when he started the Salvation Army, a couple of years later, was the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And dealing with a lot of workers, a lot of people dealing with addictions due to working in the mills, and Salvation Army just started growing from that. So I think there's certain things like that, which it's like, okay, they had a great vision, they had a great they knew who their target audience was, and they went and did that. Where I think sometimes people go, well, let's do this event because it will get people to come to our church. and it may be evangelistic or it may not be evangelistic. And I think, that's why it's a loaded question, because it varies depending on what the program or the event is and kind of what the vision or the goal for it is.
I think too, like, I mean, you nailed it with, what it is, but like, I think also too, knowing your demographic, knowing what you're reaching out to offer. And outreach could look like a number of different things, right? It could be hospitality, it could be visitation, it could be back to school, whatever. Community festival, fall festival, trunk or treat, Christmas in the park. I don't know, like where you could have all these different kind of events within your community to raise awareness for the gospel of Jesus and to give back to the community. And I think a lot of times, like my late mother was always brainstorming ideas about how we can do outreach. And her and my dad always pastored mid to small, small to mid-sized churches. And when I was a little kid, I remember two things my mom did. One was when we were in Coshocton, Ohio, at that church. One of the big things my mom liked to do was she did like this summer community festival. And so it was just this, I don't know if you've been to Coshocton, Scott, but it's a super small community. And I don't even know what like the amount of people that live there are, but like, it's a cool little small town. Right. And so, she spent the entire year gathering donations. She worked with vendors, grocery stores within the community to gather things like pop or soda, chips, hot dogs, and a lot of times my mom worked her butt off, but my mom was able to like get deals or, hey, if our church people come in here and buy, 4 bags of hot dog buns, will you match that purchase? Or if somebody buys 10 bottles of soda, will you match, half of that?
Yeah.
Or whatever. Right. And so like a lot of times my mom was able to raise everything, like as far as food and stuff for, for this community festival. And so she, it was almost like, okay, we're going to share the gospel. We're going to give away, food. We're going to have live music. We're going to have an evangelist, like you were talking about, share the word. And then, we're going to have giveaways, whether that's backpacks, whether that's clothing, whether that's, I don't know, you name it, give those things away. Another thing she did when we were in Amsterdam church, which is about an hour north of where Coshocton is, my mom loved to feed people. Right. And so she was big on community Thanksgiving dinners. And so when we were in Amsterdam, she did the community Thanksgiving dinner every year, and she was able to raise the money to purchase all the food. And she fed 500 to 1,000 people every year. Right? And so people would come in, they would get free food. They would have to-go orders for people that couldn't get out. The people were shut in. People that weren't able to drive or whatever. Like we had people that would deliver the food. We had people that would take the orders. My mom again would make it so that we'd had 20 turkeys to cook, so that people we would never we wouldn't run out of food. We had somebody speak, like an evangelist, somebody to pray over the meal, somebody to share the gospel, tell people about our church every hour or so that was going on. I don't know. It was like I don't remember when we did. It wasn't like actually on Thanksgiving Day, but it was around that time. And so like we did it like, I don't know, 12, 1 in the afternoon until probably 6 or 8 at night. And, those are all, local to the church ideas. Another thing my mom used to do when we went back to Coshocton for a minute, I feel like I'm hopping all over the place, but
you're fine.
Another thing she did was, when we were in Coshocton, there was a bus ministry or a van ministry that was huge when we were at that church. The church ran around 100 to 200 people, just varied from the season. We were there almost 8 years. And a big part of that ministry was the bus and van ministry. A lot of people couldn't drive to church. So there were people that drove vans. Believe it or not, back then, people drove vans and drove buses. And there were anywhere from 40 to 60 kids every single week that would be bussed in for children's ministry, for Sunday school, for church, all those things. And those kids got to hear the gospel. Now, the good and bad of that is that a lot of those kids came from pretty bad situations. Like they came from abuse, neglect, bad home lives, right? And so my mom felt really, really pressed to do a breakfast for these kids every Sunday. So they would get them, they would go on purpose, they would go get them on the bus, they would run them, get them to the church, get them there early enough before Sunday school or church started so that my mom would be able to feed them. So they came in, they got their food, they prayed, they shared a lesson, they ate food. And for that, Scott, some of that was food that those kids didn't have over the weekend. That was a meal that they didn't have over the weekend, right? And so, gushing about my mom and how great she was, but those are they're all great ideas for outreach. I taught a class in leadership focus last fall, and one of my students, she is a children's pastor, and she talked a lot about how their church is being very intentional about outreach outside of their church. And so they're, instead of doing the traditional VBS at church, they did a VBS outside of the church. And so what they did was they partnered with some other churches, and then they did a VBS in the community for people that didn't have it. And part of that was giving away backpacks and school supplies and giving, a chance for these kids to hear the gospel in a probably a rural area, probably an area where these folks aren't very churched or may have never been to church in their life. I think that those are all great examples, I think, of outreach. And I don't know if I answered your question as far as is that really a good way to do outreach? I think so.
Yeah. I think everything you said there was very interesting because it was very it breaks something down. And there's actually something here where someone was talking about
hello, I'm Kevin Collins, lead pastor.
Kevin Collins.
Your computer's going off, mine's going off.
Yeah, it's a weird day. But no, I think what's funny is that I was actually looking something for community outreach stuff, like how do you gauge success in community outreach? And actually there's this resource that I pulled up, and actually it's not a Christian resource, it's more just certain things that you need to think about, and they're actually referencing Planned Parenthood for an example. And I want to read this because this is the Planned Parenthood of Michigan, and here's kind of their whole their mission statement and what they kind of offer. And it says, the Planned Parenthood of Michigan believes that people of all ages has the right to learn about their sexuality and develop skills to make healthy decisions about their bodies and relationships. Whether you are a health or human service professional, teacher, religious leader, parent, student, or concerned citizen, PPMI can design, deliver, and evaluate educational sessions that are customized to meet the needs of your learners. Our experienced educator tailors each training session or presentation to the needs of the audience. So one of the first things when you break it down is it really boils down for them okay, education and outreach is the main big core values of this organization. So education, make people aware of what options they have, and outreach, you're engaging with your target audience. And what I find so fascinating about this, and I've told people at when I worked at camp this story, because we were talking about a lot of times I don't know if you've ever had this when you were a counselor, Micah, but sometimes you would have students that were very much wanted to talk about the ladies, or the ladies always want to talk to boys. So you had to have that conversation about not only about relationships, but occasionally you had to kind of talk a little bit about sex with your students at summer camp. And it was one of those things where I had
especially middle school camp. Oh my goodness.
Well, middle school and then even high school. But I remember literally.
Well, I think that middle school is worse because it's the hormones are really starting to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I remember I was conflicted because people wanted me to kind of share my story or whatnot with people. And it was kind of hard because I know a lot of times Planned Parenthood gets a kind of a negative rap within the Christian community for various reasons. And I had to go talk to my boss because I'm saying, hey, I want to let you know I'm probably going to talk about Planned Parenthood because the first time I ever heard about abstinence was through Planned Parenthood. Through a teacher from Planned Parenthood came and spoke at our school. And I remember 8th grade got these little like mirrors in these gel cases that said abstinence is freedom. And I mean, yeah, they talked about, safe sex, contraceptives, but then they said, with contraceptives, nothing is never 100%. There's always a chance of risk where you could get someone pregnant or you could get a sexually transmitted disease. But the 100% foolproof way of not getting anyone pregnant or getting a sexually transmitted disease is to simply practice abstinence and not to have sex until you're with the right person. And I never heard that in church. I mean, I don't think I've ever had the topic of sex brought up in all the years I was in youth group. Never. So
I remember Jordan last year calling me. Jordan Halstead, he's been on our show, and we're on him. We're talking. Was talking about how he was doing a purity series, and he works at, but he wrote the curriculum, he wrote his sermons, but he went to Steve, his pastor, and was like, "Here's what I'm going to talk about. Is this okay?" But to your point, Scott, I don't same deal. I don't remember hearing that stuff in church.
Yeah,
when I was a kid. And why is that? Good.
Or the stuff you hear about church would have been at a convention or maybe a big international youth convention where they talked about, well, be a virgin. If you're not a virgin, you can be a second virgin. And, it's about signing these pledge cards or wearing these purity rings. And that was really, it was almost like don't have sex. That was the only conversation that they would say, don't do it. And if you do it, then it's bad, but you can repent and become a born-again virgin or something like that, which I'm like, oh, okay. Or a spiritual virgin, oh, okay. What does that mean? But when you think about, but as I was thinking about that, I was looking at kind of what's the goal of outreach? And one of the things was, focus on a particular issue and just kind of the example of your mom, there's kids who probably don't have a good meal to eat. So the fact that she was able to do that, that was a target audience. Maybe it's to educate the community. Maybe it's to create awareness for your organization. I remember when I was in Northeast Ohio pastoring, the reputation of the church was, oh yeah, that church, they're the ones that have the funny sayings on their sign, on their church sign. And that was all people knew about the church. They didn't know that we had a Narcotics Anonymous group meeting in our church. So it was one of those things that even though I was only there for 2.5 years, I tried to make a big thing on the sign instead of me putting, God sent you a Facebook friend request. Will you accept? Or whatever dumb.
We need to do an episode, Scott, on church signs.
Oh my gosh. If we did that, I'd be going on a rant. But no, it was stuff like that. So, we started putting some events. We did a clothing drive and we actually ended up getting a barn where people can throw their clothes in and then someone would come and pick it up. And we got 2 or 3 cents per pound of clothes that came back to the church, but then we could open up and use it. So every spring and every fall, we would go through the clothing. We'd pick out some of the stuff that was really nice and not damaged. And then we just give it away. We did a free clothing giveaway to people who were in need. We had a driving school in the church. We had, Narcotics Anonymous. We had a Weight Watchers group meeting inside of church. So in the 2 years, we had all this stuff that was happening, and we just made the community aware of it by putting it on our sign or putting it on our website. And eventually, when people would go, oh, when I tell people I was a pastor, and go, oh, what church do you pastor? And I go, oh, this church right here. And they go, oh, that's the one that's across the Speedway that has all these different community programs. And when I heard that, it was like, oh, wow, great. Like, they now know that we're not the church with the cute, funny sayings on the sign. Until I left, and then they went back to the cute, funny sayings on the sign, to the point that when the Supreme Court judged the ruling to make same-sex marriage legal, I don't know who put it on the church sign, but someone put, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did. And then even put like a couple of scripture references that condemned homosexuality. And the thing is like, I came back for a wedding. Like, this was probably like 6 months after I left. I came back to do a wedding.
Still there?
And I was talking, no, it wasn't there. There's something else there. But I was talking to somebody, and like someone from the Narcotics Anonymous group, and they go, yeah, we were scared to have meetings here. We thought people were so mad. We thought that someone was going to blow up the church at one point because someone took a picture of it and put it on like one of those like Facebook groups for that community. And there was a whole lot of drama. And even the pastor of the new pastor at that church kept saying like, oh, hey, we're actually a great friend. And I'm like defending. I'm like, I don't know who put that on the sign, but this is a really great and friendly church. Like, I'm a former pastor there, and it's fantastic. Like, I don't know what happened or who put that on there. And then even the current pastor saying like, hey, very friendly. But yeah, I don't know who would have put that about Adam and Eve, Adam and Steve. But that's something you don't put on a church sign.
Are you on Twitter?
I am.
I haven't been on Twitter. I mean, I'm on Twitter, but I haven't used it for a while.
Yeah.
For the longest time, there was like the hashtag Sunday church signs or hashtag cringe church signs.
Oh.
And so on Sundays, Alicia and I would look at them. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so bad. Like, why do people think this is?
I don't know, but it is. It's like one of those things where I'm just like, not good. Not good at all.
So do you think, let me ask you this, and I mean, I'll answer it too, but do you think that we missed a mark with outreach and the idea of outreach, and we're too centered on the church itself instead of going out into the community?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of people who, when they do outreach, the focus is particularly either A, they want to try to get people in the church, so let's showcase the church by having this event. And then other times, I feel like there's a lot of churches who they do these outreach events, but really all it is trying to bring people in the church so people can buy goods so that the church has money to pay their bills.
Yeah, which is bad.
Like for an example, and there was a time where, I've worked at churches and there'd always be different events. And, you have like a vacation Bible school, which that particularly is an outreach thing. You're doing like a Sunday, weekly or however long Bible program for kids, whether they're church kids or non-church kids. And you're just having a fun event. But there was a couple times, especially where people would do like fall festivals.
Yep.
Which, and it would be like, oh, hey, we're going to have this. We're going to have this. And there's one particular where they had fall goods that you can buy. You could buy food there. There was a indoor yard sale competition. There was like a bake sale. And there's even like raffles. And the whole point was to go around and sell these goods so you can get money so it can help pay the bills for the church. And I remember sitting in that service and, they told the final amount of how much money was raised and everyone clapped and everyone is happy. And it's like, oh, as opposed to there's another church that was doing a fall festival too. They had bounce houses. They had inflatables. They had face painting. They had food. But then they also encourage people to either A, bring a Lowe's bucket full of nails and screws or like supplies, or donate money so that they can go and build. And they partnered with Habitat for Humanity, this church did, so that they could build a house in their community, for a low-income house for a family. And when you think about it, Fall Festival, both of them have Fall Festival in title. One was about making money to pay the bills. The other one was about getting supplies and funds to help build a house for someone in the community. Or, hey, someone's house burnt down and they lost everything. We're going to go raise some funds, or we're going to donate clothes, donate all these things so that these kids and this family can kind of quickly get back on their feet after they've lost everything. And just that mindset of what outreach is can tell you kind of where the heart is at people. Let's keep our church doors open versus let's help people in need. And
Yeah,
both are in the same. Both these churches are in the same community too.
Yeah, I think you certainly have to think about, the purpose of outreach, and is it, to raise money and awareness like for your church, or is it to truly raise money and awareness for the community, right? And so, if your church is in bad enough shape that you're having to raise money to keep the doors open, that you need to be doing some other stuff. Not just outreach. You need to be doing some health assessments and figuring out what you can do to keep the church alive and keep the church going, instead of outreach and then raising money to keep your church open. Preach about stewardship. That's another story. Well, we did an episode on that a couple months ago. I totally agree with you, Scott. Like, I think that it's, what is your intention, right, with outreach? And like I mentioned earlier, is it to give food to those who don't have it? Is it to give backpacks?
Mm-hmm.
I remember a couple of years back, I was at a church and we did this day-long outreach event, and a big part of it was clothing, like you were talking about clothing earlier, right? And so, like, people would just donate clothes. And I remember Alicia and I, every year that we were at that church, would clean our closets out, and basically the clothes we didn't wear, we donated to the church for that reason, right? And so I remember, Scott, no joke, one year there was this woman, Hispanic, I think she was a Hispanic woman. She was real little, real petite, right? And so, like, she walked in and she probably had 5 or 6 kids.
Yeah.
Right. And she probably weighed 100 pounds soaking wet. And I remember just holding the door for her. She walked out and she had two garbage bags full of clothes, because her kids weren't going to get to go school shopping for back to school.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the money, because she was a single income parent, because she had 4 or 5 or 6 children, however many that was. And those were going to be clothes. Those are going to be new clothes to her, right? And new clothes to her kids. And I just thought of the joy on her face when she walked out and she realized, I think I remember her saying, I don't have to go school shopping now, or clothes shopping for school. That's the gospel. That's outreach, right? And if you're doing it like you said, to make money for things, that's not okay. That's not right. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that, it's an interesting concept. And there's a number of ways to do it, right? Like we were talking about with VBSs and festivals and food and dinners and things like that. Like, yes, it takes money to do. That's the other thing, Scott. Like, yes, it takes money to do these things, these events, these outreach events. However, I look at it this way, and I think this is the way that people should look at it. If you're donating money to the ministry and donating money to the church and donating money to outreach, then you shouldn't you shouldn't have your hand out in return for that money back, right? And so it's literally to raise money for something. And like, I've been in situations where people like expect their money to be handed back to them once the event's over. It's like, no, you gave that money for this event, for this outreach, because people don't have it. I think people forget that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think when it comes to successful outreach, and again, we didn't really talk about just kind of the metrics of what makes something successful. I think that has to go to, well, what's your, are you reaching your target audience? Are you able to do what you're going to be able to do? Like we have an outreach here, which the church has always done, which they provide, like good tasting food for school kids, junior hires and senior hires. So it's not really an evangelistic thing, but it's.
Got Stedman's ice cream.
Oh, I haven't made ice cream for them yet. Maybe I have a bunch of pumpkin puree from last year that I froze and I need to use it up. So I may just start making some pumpkin spice ice cream. But yeah, and like last week, because both the person who was in charge of the program was on vacation and then the lead pastor is on a spiritual retreat this week. So I was in charge of leading that. And usually we average about, 40 senior hires, 40 junior hires, so 80 total. We had about 80 senior hires and almost ate through all the food. So I had to like go get which was a good problem to have. But I had to like go get some people and say, hey, can you buy some more shells because we need some for the junior hires and stuff. So yeah, it was a good time. So with all that being said, like, it's hard to you basically you measure success based on, is it benefiting, are you meeting your target audience, and is it doing so? For an example, that woman bringing the clothes, like for her, that was a valuable ministry. She was able to get clothes for her kids to go to school versus, or getting kids a nice warm breakfast before school and you provide that opportunity for someone, or feeding the homeless. Those are type of goals. So like if people are coming to your programs and that's successful, whether it's 20 people or it's 200 people, you are meeting a need, and again, word's going to spread about it. And I think that's kind of how it is. It goes back to, are you outreaching, meeting your target audience, and are you measuring, and however you're measuring your metrics, is it, if it's an evangelistic thing, how many people are coming to Jesus? If it's more of about serving a need, how many people are you benefiting with this program? And I think those are the key things, the simplest key things to kind of measure those metrics. And you always have to kind of keep your eye on the prize and not get too bogged down with random stuff that can kind of distort from the initial vision and goals of the outreach program that you're trying to do.
Well, I also think too, like you shouldn't get so hung up on if like, you're shooting for 1,000 people and you only get 600.
Yeah.
Because 600 to 600, right? So like, I think a lot of times pastors and leaders will get hung up on the fact, well, we didn't meet the mark. I'm like, well, something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I see that a lot of times too, especially with outreach. We were trying to get 1,000 people and yet we only got, 400. Well, that's 400 people that got fed. That's 400 people that got clothes. That's 400 people that the gospel was shared with. Yeah, I think it's we've talked a lot of times on your show about generational gaps and generational divides and things like that. And I think a lot of times what makes things super successful is marketing and promoting and branding and being able to really advertise your event, to get the word out there, to let people know that it's going on, whether that's social media, an ad in the local newspaper, a promotional video that you boost on your Facebook pages or on YouTube, TikTok, whatever it may be. And then, getting the word out there. I think there's a lot of folks that just, kind of snub their noses at it. Well, it's on Facebook. No, it's not. Or, you know what I mean? Like some of the older generation wouldn't want to do that, maybe, for example. But yeah, I think there's just a ton of ways. Like I shared numerous times, I work at Miami and I work at in the College of Creative Arts, and we do this thing every spring called Spark Fest. And so Spark Fest is a way for students to showcase the arts, and it's like a day-long festival that we do. And last year was the second year we did it. The first year we did it, it was super successful. We learned a lot. And then in the second year, we made some changes. We pivoted on some of the ideas and pivoted on some of the advertising and marketing and things like that. But Scott, we have more people the second year than we did the first because we were able to adapt and make those changes. like we we were able to, I think we saw 4,000 people this spring for that festival. And part of my role in that was to order food and make sure that we had supplies and things like that. We ordered $200, no, $200 to $400 of pizza, and it was like a ton of pizza, and it was gone in 20 minutes. We ordered an ice cream truck, like a food truck, an ice cream truck, and I spent $2,000 on ice cream because that's how many servings of ice cream we served. So back to the whole marketing and branding conversation, like if you market it well and advertise it well, like I'm a big proponent of like, oh, if this doesn't work, let's do it all, right? Like if you got to call the radio station in your community, if people still listen to the radio, have an ad on the radio, have an ad in a newspaper, put it on Facebook, like I said earlier. So I think it's all trial and error, right? Like until you find what works for you, and also being able to adapt with the times as you move forward is important as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But so that's going to be it for us today, friends. So everyone, thank you so much for listening to us. Hopefully this tad bit, I know it's just Mike and I kind of talking and processing through, but like he says, outreach is kind of a loaded question depending on your mindset and depending on what you want to try to do. You may think you're doing outreach, and maybe you are by having like your fall festival, but again, it goes back to what's your target audience and what are you trying to accomplish. And if you're trying to accomplish to do good and to present the message of Jesus Christ to everybody, then that should be the outreach thing. And if you're trying to do, maybe your thing is to get rich quick, then I guess that's a goal. But that's something that you have to really think about when it comes to outreach and what's the goal of outreach. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you like this episode or you like this podcast, please give us a review on anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we'll be back on next week with another episode. Hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.